Every night at the town's coffee shop, Margaret, the pragmatic store owner, looked down on Julian because of his wheelchair. She called him a burden, but little did she know, the man she mocked possessed a brilliant mind and hands that played the most soul-stirring violin melodies, while Clara's father plotted to drive him away, out of fear for his daughter's future. A sudden technological disaster struck, threatening to destroy the family's entire legacy. In that moment of desperation, the man they deemed weak became their only hope. A shocking truth is about to be revealed, that a man's worth is measured by his heart and mind, not his legs. Please subscribe to our channel to witness this inspiring journey of love and resilience. The humid air of the Southern Valley hung heavy over the dusty streets of the town. It was the kind of heat that made the cicadas scream in the oak trees. Inside Margaret's general store and coffee shop, the atmosphere was just as thick. Ceiling fans whirred overhead. They moved the scent of roasted beans and floor wax in lazy circles. Margaret stood behind the polished oak counter. She was a woman built of sharp angles and iron will. Her eyes were always scanning, counting the jars on the shelves, checking the clock, watching the door. To Margaret, life was a ledger. Everything had a cost, everything had a place, and if it did not serve a direct purpose, it was a liability. The bell above the door chimed. It was a bright and cheerful sound that cut through the low hum of the morning. Margaret looked up from her shipment manifest. A man entered, but he did not walk. He rolled. Julian moved with a quiet and practiced grace. His wheelchair was a modern piece of engineering, sleek, black. It hummed softly on the hardwood floor. On his lap sat a small girl, Rose. She had golden curls and eyes that seemed to take in the whole world at once. Julian stopped a few feet from the counter. He wore a clean and pressed button-down shirt. His face was kind, marked by the faint lines of a man who had seen both struggle and success. He offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Margaret. I believe we had an appointment at 10 o'clock. Margaret did not return the smile. Her gaze dropped instantly to the wheels. Then it traveled up to Julian's lap, then finally to his eyes. The silence lasted a heartbeat too long. She set her pen down with a sharp click. "I remember the appointment," she said. Her voice was as dry as the Georgia dirt. But the letter did not mention this. She gestured vaguely at the wheelchair. Her lip curled just a fraction. Not enough to be a snarl, but enough to show her hand. Julian did not flinch. He had seen that look 1,000 times. The look that reduced a man to a set of broken parts. The letter mentioned, "I am a systems engineer," Julian replied calmly. It mentioned, "I am looking for a fresh start for my daughter and me." I thought those were the qualifications we discussed. Margaret stepped out from behind the counter. She folded her arms across her chest. She walked a slow circle around him, like a buyer inspecting a horse with a limp. Other customers in the shop lowered their voices. The clink of spoons against porcelain stopped. "Look, Julian, I am a businesswoman. I run this shop. I run the mail. I run the inventory for half this county." She stopped in front of him. She leaned in, her shadow falling over little Rose. "I agreed to this meeting because the matchmaker said you were looking to build a life. I need a partner, a man who can hoist flour sacks, a man who can climb a ladder to fix the roof when the storms hit, someone who can stand on his own 2 feet when the work gets hard." She paused. Her eyes were cold and practical. "I do not need another person to look after. I already have a store full of things that break. I do not need a husband who comes with his own set of repairs." Rose shifted in Julian's lap. She reached out and gripped her father's thumb. Her small face was pale. She did not understand the words, but she understood the cruelty. Julian felt a quiet and protective fire rising in his chest. He looked at Margaret. He saw the polished shelves. He saw the perfect rows of canned goods. He realized then that this shop was a cage, and Margaret was the warden. "I am not a repair project." "Margaret," Julian said. His voice was steady, low. "I am a father. I am an engineer, and I have built more in my life than you could ever imagine." He reached down and gently squeezed Rose's hand. "It seems I made a mistake. I was looking for a home. But it seems you are only looking for a laborer." Julian turned the wheels of his chair with a swift and strong motion. He did not wait for a rebuttal. The bell chimed again as they exited into the glare of the morning sun. He rolled down the sidewalk. Rose looked up at him. Her bottom lip was trembling. "Are we going back to the city?" Daddy Julian stopped near a large elm tree. He looked down at his daughter. "No, Rosebud. We are not going back. There is a whole world out there, and someone in this town has a heart bigger than a cash register." That afternoon, Julian did not look for another matchmaker. He looked for a place to hide away, a place to think. By sunset, they reached the edge of the Franklin property. It was a vast sea of green. Thousands of peach trees stood like silent sentinels. The air here smelled different, sweet, heavy with the scent of ripening fruit and damp earth. At the very edge of the orchard sat a small cabin. It was gray and weathered. The porch was slightly tilted, but it was solid. The landlord handed Julian the key. "It is quiet out here," the man said. "Most folks find it too lonely." Julian looked at Rose. She was already reaching for a blade of grass. She looked at a butterfly dancing near the porch. "It is not lonely," Julian said. "It is peaceful." He moved his chair onto the wooden deck. The wood creaked under the weight. It was an honest sound. He looked out at the rows of trees. The sun was dipping below the horizon. The sky turned a deep and bruised purple. Gold light caught the edges of the peach leaves. Julian felt a surge of strength. He had his daughter, he had his mind, and he had a new beginning. Inside the cabin, the air was cool. He began to unpack the few belongings they carried. The laptops went onto a small table. The soft blankets went onto Rose's bed. He sat by the open window. The crickets were beginning their evening chorus. Julian looked toward the big white house on the hill. The master of the orchard lived there. He did not know what the future held. He only knew that he was done being measured by his legs. From now on, he would be measured by his soul. The moon hung like a silver coin over the Franklin orchard. It cast long and skeletal shadows across the rows of peach trees. The night was still. Too still. Clara stood on the balcony of the grand white farmhouse. She leaned her weight against the wooden railing. Her eyes were fixed on the distant silhouette of the small cabin at the edge of the property. The cabin had been empty for a long time, but now, a small and amber light flickered in the window. Clara moved her left hand. It rested inside the pocket of her silk robe. She flexed her fingers. They felt stiff. They felt heavy, like lead. She remembered the day the machinery had failed in the packing house. She remembered the sharp pain and the cold realization that followed. The doctors had saved her hand, but they could not save her music. She was once the pride of the county, a prodigy. People would travel from miles away just to hear her play the violin. Now, she was just a ghost in a beautiful house, a shadow of the girl who once commanded the strings. Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken. A note drifted through the cool air. It was soft, fragile, like a secret whispered in the dark. Clara held her breath. She knew that sound. It was a violin. But it was not played with the cold precision of a student. It was played with the heart of a survivor. The melody grew stronger. It was a lullaby, ancient and sweet. The notes climbed over the peach trees and danced along the garden wall. They carried the scent of pine and old memories. They carried a sense of peace that Clara had not felt in years. Down in the cabin, Julian sat in his chair by the open screen door. The moonlight hit the bridge of his violin. He did not look at any sheet music. He did not need to. He looked at the small bed in the corner of the room. Rose was fast asleep. Her breathing was rhythmic and calm. Every stroke of Julian's bow was a promise to her. A promise that they were safe. A promise that he would always be her strength. He played a low and resonant chord. It vibrated through his chest. He poured his frustration from the encounter with Margaret into the strings. He poured his hope for their new life into the wood. The music was his voice. It said everything his legs could not. Up on the hill. Clara felt a tear track down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. The music was doing something to her. It was waking up a part of her soul that she had buried under layers of bitterness. It was a song of resilience. It was a song that understood what it meant to be broken. "Who are you?" she whispered to the wind. She looked down at her injured hand for the first time in months. She did not feel just pain. She felt a spark of curiosity, a spark of life. The music stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The night rushed back in. The crickets resumed their chirping. The wind rustled the peach leaves, but the air felt different now. The silence was no longer heavy. It was expectant. Clara stood there for a long time. She watched the amber light in the cabin window dim. Then, it went out. She stepped back into her room. She looked at the velvet case sitting on top of her dresser. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the cold latch. She was not ready to open it yet, but she was ready for something else. The next morning, the sun rose hot and bright over the valley. The laborers were already in the fields. The smell of earth and ripening fruit filled the air. Clara did not stay in her room. She did not hide behind the heavy curtains. She put on a simple cotton dress. She tied her hair back with a ribbon. She walked down the grand staircase. Her father was sitting at the breakfast table. He was reading a ledger and sipping black coffee. He looked up and his eyes widened in surprise. "Good morning. You are up early. I am going for a walk." "Father," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "To the orchard," he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "To the edge of the property," she replied. "I want to see who has moved into the old cabin." Her father set his coffee cup down. His face hardened slightly. "Just a man and his daughter, a technician from the city. He is quiet, stays out of the way." Clara nodded. She did not mention the music. She did not mention how it had pierced through her armor. She just turned and walked out the door. The path to the cabin was overgrown. Wildflowers pushed through the gravel. Clara walked slowly. Every step felt like a journey. She passed the rows of trees where the fruit hung heavy and red. As she neared the cabin, she heard a different sound, laughter, high and bright. She stopped behind a large oak tree. She peered through the branches. There was Julian. He was not inside the cabin. He was on the wooden ramp he had built. He was spinning his wheelchair in a circle, fast and faster. Rose was standing on the footrest of the chair. She was holding onto his arms. Her head was thrown back. She was laughing with pure joy. Julian was laughing too. His face was transformed. The weary man from the town was gone. In his place was a father who was a king, a father who was a hero. Clara watched them. She saw the way he moved. She saw the strength in his shoulders. She saw the grace in his hands. Then, Rose saw her. The little girl stopped laughing and pointed toward the oak tree. "Look, Daddy. A lady." Julian slowed the chair to a stop. He turned toward Clara. He brushed a stray hair from his forehead. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look ashamed. He looked at her with a calm and welcoming gaze. Clara stepped out from the shadows. She felt shy, like a child. "I am Clara," she said. "I live in the house on the hill." Julian nodded. "I am Julian, and this is Rose." He looked at her for a moment. His eyes were sharp, intelligent. "I hope my playing did not disturb you last night. The valley carries sound very far." Clara shook her head quickly. "No, it did not disturb me. It was beautiful." She looked at his hands, strong hands, hands that knew how to work, and hands that knew how to heal. "I used to play too," Clara whispered. The words felt heavy in the air. Julian looked at her left hand. He saw the way she held it, protectively, close to her heart. He did not ask what happened. He did not offer pity. "The music is still there," he said softly. "It does not live in the fingers. It lives in the breath. It lives in the memory." Clara felt a lump in her throat. She looked at the old cabin. She looked at the man who had turned a ruin into a home. "I would like to hear it again," she said, "if you do not mind." Julian smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "Any time, Clara." The porch is always open. As she walked back up the hill, the sun felt warmer on her shoulders. The orchard felt more alive. She did not know what the future held. She did not know about her father's fears. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time. She was looking forward to the night, because in the night, the melodies would return, and perhaps, one day, she would find the strength to play along. The afternoon sun was a deep and heavy gold. It poured over the peach orchard like warm honey. Clara walked down the sloping path toward the edge of the valley. The grass brushed against her ankles. The air was thick with the scent of overripe fruit and the humming of bees. She reached the small cabin. Julian was sitting on the porch. He was not playing his violin today. Instead, his lap was covered by a sleek and silver laptop. His fingers were moving with a strange and rhythmic speed. Click, click, tap. Rose was sitting on the wooden steps. She was trying to weave long blades of grass into a crown. When she saw Clara, her face lit up like a sunrise. "Clara, look, I am making a hat for a princess." Clara smiled, a real and genuine smile. "It is beautiful, Rose. Maybe later you can show me how to tie the knots." Julian looked up from his screen. He closed the laptop and set it aside on a small wooden crate. "Welcome back, Clara." "We were just enjoying the quiet before the evening mosquitoes arrive." Clara stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under her feet. She looked at Julian. Then she looked at the wheelchair. She thought about the gossip she had heard at Margaret's general store. Margaret had called him a liability. She had called him a man who needed looking after. How could she be so wrong, Clara thought. She sat down on an old wicker chair across from him. "I heard what happened at the store. With Margaret," she said. Her voice was soft and full of regret. "The news travels fast in Pineville." Julian leaned back. He did not look angry. He did not look hurt. He looked like a man who had made peace with the world long ago. "Margaret sees the world in inventory," he said. "She sees arms that can carry boxes. She sees legs that can climb stairs. If a piece of equipment is bent, she throws it away." He looked down at his own legs, then he looked back at Clara. "But I am not equipment, and neither are you." And Clara felt a sharp intake of breath. She looked at her left hand. It was resting in her lap. Still, lifeless. The scars were white against her tanned skin. "I was supposed to be touring the great halls by now," she whispered. "I was supposed to be playing for the world. Now. I can barely hold a kitchen knife without my fingers shaking." Julian nodded slowly. He reached out and tapped the laptop he had just put down. "I lived in a world of logic, of perfect codes. If there was a bug in the system, I could fix it. I could rewrite the lines until everything was perfect." He paused. He looked out at the rows of trees. "But life is not a program. A single moment on a rainy road can break the logic." The code was shattered. I spent a long time in a hospital bed, wondering why I could not just reboot the system. Clara looked at him. She saw the pain behind his calm exterior. "How did you find the music again?" Julian smiled, a small and thoughtful smile. "I realized that the melody was still in my head. The wheelchair changed how I move, but it did not change how I hear. I had to learn a new way to be a man, a new way to be a father." He looked at Rose. She was now chasing a blue butterfly near the porch railing. "She is my rhythm," Julian said. "She keeps me on beat." Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It was a feeling she had forgotten, the feeling of being understood, for months. Her father had looked at her with pity. The town had looked at her with sadness, but Julian looked at her like a fellow soldier, someone who had been to the front lines of grief and come back alive. They talked for hours. The shadows grew long and purple across the orchard floor. Julian spoke about the beauty of technology, how a few lines of code could connect people across the globe, how a machine could think, but could never feel. Clara spoke about the strings, how the violin was not just wood and wire, how it was a living thing that breathed with the player. She spoke about the fear of the silence, the terrible silence that had filled her life after the accident. "You know," Julian said softly, "the most beautiful music has pauses. Silence is not the end of the song. It is just the space between the notes." Rose came running back to the porch. She tripped slightly on the top step. Clara reached out instinctively. She caught the little girl with her right hand and steadied her. "Careful. Rosebud." Rose giggled and leaned her head against Clara's knee. "You smell like peaches, Clara. I like it." Clara smoothed the girl's hair. The touch felt natural, healing. She looked at the cabin behind them. It was small. The paint was peeling. But with the sound of Rose's laughter and the presence of Julian, it did not feel like a ruin anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. "I brought some bread," Clara said, "and some fresh butter from the farmhouse. I thought you might be hungry." Julian's eyes brightened. "That is the best news I have heard all day. Logic is good for the mind, but bread is good for the soul." They ate together on the porch, simple food, eaten with hands and shared stories. The sun finally dipped below the trees. The first fireflies began to blink in the tall grass. As Clara stood up to leave, the night felt less frightening. The hill back to the grand house did not seem so steep. "Thank you." "Julian," she said, "for the talk." Julian picked up his laptop. "Thank you for the company, Clara." Rose has not smiled that much in a very long time. Clara walked away, but she stopped at the edge of the porch. She looked back. Julian was watching her. The moonlight was starting to catch the silver on his chair. "We are not broken, are we?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "No." "Clara, we are just rearranged. And sometimes. The new arrangement is more beautiful than the old one." Clara climbed the hill. Her heart felt light. She thought about the violin case upstairs in her room. She thought about the dust. Maybe tomorrow she would find a cloth. Maybe tomorrow she would start to clean it, because down in the valley, a man was rewriting the code of her life, and for the first time in years, she wanted to hear the next line. The office of Mr. Franklin was a place of heavy oak and old ledgers. It smelled of dried tobacco and the ink of 1,000 transactions. Through the tall window, the master of the orchard watched the world he had built. Thousands of trees stood in perfect rows. They represented 30 years of sweat and sacrifice. But Mr. Franklin was not looking at the trees today. He was looking at the small figure of his daughter. Clara was walking down the slope toward the valley. She carried a small basket of bread. Her step was lighter than it had been in a long time. She was heading toward the small cabin. Mr. Franklin felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. It was not anger, it was fear. He remembered the long years of his wife's illness. He remembered the joy of their youth, but he also remembered the weight of being the sole caregiver, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the way the light had slowly faded from her eyes. He looked at Julian. The man in the wheelchair was visible on the cabin porch. Mr. Franklin saw the way Julian looked up when Clara arrived. He saw the genuine smile. He saw the way Clara sat down beside him without hesitation. To the world. It was a beautiful friendship. To a protective father. It was a path toward a life of hardship for his only child. "Clara has suffered enough," he whispered to the empty room. "She has lost her music. She has lost her dreams. I will not let her lose her freedom to a life of nursing another." He turned away from the window. His face was set like stone. He did not want to hurt the man. Julian seemed like a decent soul, a talented man. But in the eyes of Mr. Franklin, Julian was a burden that his daughter was not strong enough to carry. He picked up the black telephone on his desk. He dialed a number he knew by heart, the landlord of the small cabin. The conversation was short. It was professional, but the underlying message was clear. Mr. Franklin wanted that cabin empty. He spoke about the need for more storage space. He mentioned the rising value of the land near the orchard. He offered to pay a premium if the current tenant was moved out by the end of the month. The landlord was a man who understood the language of money. He did not ask why. He only agreed. Down in the valley, the sun was setting. The golden hour had arrived. Julian was sitting on his porch. Rose was playing with a wooden truck near his feet. The air was sweet, but Julian felt a sudden chill. He saw the landlord's old truck pulling up the gravel drive. The man did not get out of the car. He rolled down the window. His face was apologetic, but his eyes were looking at the ground. "Julian." "I am afraid I have some bad news," the man said. Julian stopped the wheels of his chair. He looked at the man's uneasy expression. "What is it?" "The owners of the land. They want to renovate. They have decided not to renew the lease. You have until the end of the week to vacate." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian felt a familiar ache in his chest. He had felt it many times before. The moment the world told him he no longer fit into the plans of the able-bodied. "Renovate," Julian asked softly. "I have paid my rent early. I have repaired the porch. I have done no harm." The man sighed. "It is out of my hands." "Julian, I am sorry." The truck drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Julian sat in the fading light. He looked up toward the big white house on the hill. He saw the glint of sunlight on the office window. He saw a shadow moving behind the glass. He knew. He understood. He felt a pang of heartbreak, not for the house, but for the connection that was being severed before it could fully bloom. He thought of Clara's laughter. He thought of the way she looked at Rose. He thought of the hope that had started to grow in his own heart. "Daddy Rose asked." She tugged on his sleeve. Why did the man leave? Julian looked down at his daughter, his little Rose. She had finally stopped having nightmares here. She had started to bloom like the peach blossoms. The man was just telling us it is time for another adventure. Rosebud, Julian said. His voice was thick but steady. He moved his chair into the cabin. He looked at his laptop on the table. He looked at the violin case. He did not cry. He did not rage. He understood the fear of a father. He was a father himself. He knew that if he thought someone would bring pain to Rose, he would do the same. But it did not make the packing any easier. He began to move in the quiet of the night. He folded the small clothes of his daughter. He wrapped his electronics in soft blankets. The movements were slow, deliberate. The hum of his wheelchair was the only sound in the room. He looked at the violin. He wanted to play. He wanted to let the music carry his sorrow up the hill. But he stopped. He did not want to disturb the peace he had found. If he was to leave, he would leave with dignity. He sat by the window one last time. The moon was hidden behind a bank of clouds. The orchard was a dark and mysterious sea. Julian felt a profound sense of isolation. He was a man of logic. He was a man of science. But logic could not explain the cruelty of a well-intentioned heart. Mr. Franklin thought he was saving Clara. But Julian knew the truth. He was not just taking away a neighbor. He was taking away a mirror that showed Clara she was van kon Nguyen Ven. Julian bowed his head. He prayed for the strength to move again. He prayed for Rose to find another garden. And he prayed for Clara, that she would not let the silence return to her soul. The next morning, the boxes were stacked by the door. The cabin was returning to its empty, echoing state. Julian looked at the hill. He saw the curtains in the grand house remained closed. He did not know if Clara knew. He hoped she did not. He wanted to believe that her world was still full of the music he had played. He took Rose's hand. "We will find another place," he whispered. "A place where the hills are kind." But as he looked at the peach trees, he knew he would miss the scent of this valley. He would miss the way the light hit the strings in the evening. And he would miss the woman who had seen the man, instead of the chair. The darkness of the valley was usually a comfort. But tonight, the darkness felt heavy. A storm of a different kind was brewing inside the steel walls of the Franklin warehouse. The orchard was at its peak. Thousands of crates of prime peaches sat in the cold storage units. They were perfectly chilled, ready for the long journey to the distant cities. Millions of dollars in fruit. The entire legacy of the Franklin name. It was all resting behind a digital gate. Then, the silence was broken by an alarm. It was a high and shrill sound that cut through the midnight air. In the command center, the lights on the main console flickered from green to a violent and pulsing red. A technician sat at the desk. His face was pale in the glow of the monitors. His fingers were shaking as he hit the keys. "The refrigeration is failing," he whispered. "The fans are slowing down." Mr. Franklin stood behind him. His hands were gripped so tight his knuckles were white. "Override it, manual control." "Do something I cannot," the technician replied. "Everything is locked. Someone has broken into the system from the outside. It is a ghost in the machine. The code is being rewritten as we speak." The temperature in the massive warehouse began to climb. 1 degree, then 2. Peaches are fragile. If the heat rises just a little more, the fruit will soften. By dawn, the entire harvest will be nothing but rot. Mr. Franklin looked at the phone. The city technicians were miles away. The local repairman did not understand the complex software. He was a man who could fight the wind and the rain, but he did not know how to fight a shadow on a screen. Clara stood in the doorway. She saw the panic in her father's eyes. She saw his empire crumbling in a single night. She knew there was only one person who could dance with the shadows. "Wait," she said. "I know someone who can help." Her father did not even look up. "Unless he can walk through a firewall. He is no use to me. He can," Clara said firmly. She ran out into the night. The orchard was dark. She scrambled down the hill toward the small cabin. She saw the boxes stacked on the porch. She saw the sign of a man ready to vanish. "Julian." She hammered on the wood. "Julian! Open up!" The door opened. Julian sat in his chair. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of a quiet sorrow. "Clara, what is it?" "The warehouse." Clara gasped for air. "It is a cyber attack. The cooling is failing. My father is going to lose everything. Please. You are the only one." Julian did not ask for an apology. He did not ask about the lease. He did not even grab a coat. He reached for his specialized laptop on the table. "Rose, stay with the landlord's wife next door. I will be back." The trip back up the hill was a battle against the mud and the dark. Clara pushed. Julian pulled. They arrived at the command center like survivors of a wreck. Mr. Franklin looked at the man in the wheelchair. He saw the tired eyes and the humble clothes. He felt a surge of doubt. "Julian, this is a sophisticated breach. It is beyond us." Julian did not answer. He rolled his chair to the main console. He pushed the local technician aside. He plugged in his own machine. "Move," he said. His voice was no longer soft. It was the voice of a commander. Julian hit the first key. The blue light of his screen reflected in his glasses. He saw the jagged lines of the malicious code. It was a complex lock, designed to suffocate the farm. His fingers began to move. They did not tap. They flew. It was a performance. The same grace that he used to pull the bow across the violin strings was now on the keyboard. Rhythmic, precise, unyielding, click, click, tap. The red lights continued to pulse. The temperature reached the danger zone. The men in the room were sweating. But Julian was cool. He was deep inside the architecture of the server. He was speaking a language only he understood. 1 hour passed. The only sound was the frantic dance of his fingers. Julian's shoulders were tense. He was fighting an invisible enemy across a digital battlefield. He found the breach. He saw the hole the intruders had left. He began to sew it shut. Suddenly, he hit a final, heavy key. The crimson lights flickered. They turned a steady and calming green. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor. The massive cooling fans in the warehouse roared back to life. The air grew cold once more. "The system is back," Julian said. His voice was hoarse. But he did not stop. He continued to type. He was not just fixing the hole. He was building a fortress. He was optimizing the cooling cycles. He was creating a shield that would never break again. The sun began to peek over the horizon. The first golden rays hit the orchard. The shipment trucks arrived at the gate. The peaches were cold. They were perfect. Julian finally closed his laptop. He leaned back in his chair. He was exhausted. The lines on his face were deep. Mr. Franklin stood in the corner. He had watched Julian for 5 hours. He had seen the brilliance. He had seen the absolute focus. He realized then that he had been looking at Julian all wrong. He had been looking at the legs, when he should have been looking at the mind. Julian turned his chair around. "The fruit is safe. Mr. Franklin, you can start the loading now." Mr. Franklin walked forward. He looked at his daughter. She was holding Julian's hand. Then, the older man looked at Julian. He felt a deep and burning shame for the phone call he had made. He felt a deep shame for wanting to drive this man away. "Julian, I was a fool," Mr. Franklin whispered. Julian looked at him. He saw the regret in the older man's eyes. "You were a father," Julian replied. "Fathers worry." Mr. Franklin knelt down. He put a hand on the arm of Julian's chair. "I thought I was protecting Clara from a life of hardship. I thought she would have to carry you." He looked at the glowing screens, the screens that saved his family's future. "But I see now. You are the one who is strong enough to carry us all." Julian looked out the window. The orchard was glowing in the morning light. He thought of his boxes packed in the cabin. He thought of the road leading out of town. "Please," Mr. Franklin said, "unpack your things. This is your home, as long as you want it to be." Clara smiled through her tears. She looked at her father. Then she looked at Julian. She saw 2 men who had finally found common ground. Julian nodded slowly. "I think Rose would like to stay," he said. "She has grown fond of the peach blossoms." The midnight rescue was over, the sun was up, and for the first time in his life, Julian felt like he was standing tall, even without his legs. The air in the valley was sweet with the scent of ripened peaches and wood smoke. It was the day of the great harvest celebration. Long wooden tables were draped in white linen across the Franklin lawn. Strings of warm lights hung from the ancient oak trees. They twinkled like fallen stars against the deepening purple of the twilight. Nearly everyone from the town was there. They came for the music, they came for the food, but most of all, they came to see the man who had saved the orchard. Julian sat in his chair at the head table. He was dressed in a clean linen shirt. Rose sat on his lap. Her hair was braided with small white jasmine flowers. She was laughing as she ate a slice of peach pie. She looked like she had lived in this valley her entire life. Clara stood beside them. She looked radiant. She wore a dress the color of the sunset. Her left hand was resting openly on the back of Julian's chair. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer a shadow. The music of a local band died down. Mr. Franklin stood up. He tapped a spoon against his crystal glass. The sound rang out clear and sharp across the lawn. The chatter of the townspeople faded into a respectful silence. Friends and neighbors, Mr. Franklin began. His voice was strong, but it carried a trace of emotion that made the crowd lean in. We have had a bountiful harvest this year, but we almost lost it all. Most of you know about the crisis in the warehouses last week. You know that our legacy was minutes away from crumbling. He turned toward Julian. The crowd followed his gaze. I want to speak a truth today, Mr. Franklin said. He looked directly at Julian. Then he looked at the crowd. When Julian first arrived in our town, I looked at him with a closed heart. I saw a man in a wheelchair, and I allowed my own fear and prejudice to blind me. I thought he was someone who needed our pity. I thought he was someone who would be a burden to my daughter. A collective breath was held in the crowd. I was wrong. Mr. Franklin's voice was a whisper now, but it carried to the back of the lawn. Julian is the strongest man I have ever known. He did not save our harvest with his legs. He saved it with his brilliant mind, and he saved it with a heart that was kind enough to help a man who had been cold to him. Mr. Franklin stepped forward. He placed a heavy, respectful hand on Julian's shoulder. Julian, I am asking for your forgiveness in front of our friends, and I am asking you to stay, not just as a neighbor, but as the technical director of the Franklin Orchard. This farm needs your vision, and our family needs you. The crowd erupted into applause. It was a thunderous sound that echoed off the hills. In the back of the crowd, standing near the drink station, was Margaret, the owner of the general store. She held her cup tight. She watched Julian. She saw the way the townspeople looked at him with genuine admiration. She saw the way Clara looked at him with deep, unwavering love. Margaret remembered the day at her store. She remembered calling him a liability. She remembered saying she did not need a husband who came with repairs. A cold stone of regret settled in her stomach. She had looked at a king and seen only the throne he sat in. She realized now that her shop was full of inventory, but it was empty of the one thing that truly mattered: character. She saw Julian's success, and she knew she had lost something far more valuable than a laborer. She had lost the chance to be part of something great. As the moon rose higher, the celebration continued, but Julian, Clara, and Rose slipped away from the noise. They moved toward the edge of the porch. The orchard stretched out before them, a sea of silver leaves under the moonlight. Julian looked at Clara. I never thought I would find a place where I truly belonged, he said softly. Clara took his hand, her fingers intertwined with his. You did not just find a place. Julian, you built it. You built it with your music, and you built it with your strength. Rose leaned her head against Julian's chest. She was getting sleepy. Is this our forever home? Daddy. Julian looked at the white farmhouse. He looked at the small cabin where his violin waited. He looked at the woman who had seen the man instead of the chair. Yes, Rosebud, he whispered, this is our forever home. They stood there in the silence. It was a perfect, resonant silence. The theme of their lives had finally reached its resolution. Happiness was not found in a perfect body. It was not found in a perfect code. It was found in the harmony of two souls. Two people who knew that being broken was just another way of being open to the light. Julian drew a deep breath of the night air. The harvest was over, but the life they were planning was just beginning to grow. True strength is never measured by the steps we take, but by the lives we touch and the hearts we mend along the way. May we all find the courage to see the brilliance in others even when it is hidden behind a quiet struggle. If this story moved, you please tell us where you are watching from in the comments, your city, your state, or your country. And don't forget to subscribe for more touching tales. Please click the video appearing on your screen now to discover our latest journey of the heart.